Can you hear me well?
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay, why don't we get started? Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the PAA webinar, Methods of Utility Expense Recovery, Improving Your Bottom Line. We hope everyone is doing well and is safe and in good health during these trying times. This webinar is meant to bring some clarification on issues that we face in the property management industry. And hopefully this will help you improve your bottom line, which we all know is very important in this industry. So just a bit of housekeeping for our webinar today. Please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, although I think some people have it at the top of their screen, rather than the chat box. So put those in the Q&A box, and we'll be answering questions as we go through the slides, and we have some time at the end if there's additional questions. So if you could move to the first disclaimer slide. Oh, you know what? We don't have a disclaimer slide in this. Okay, so sorry about that. So let me introduce our speakers. Kate Forsyth is a regional sales manager for Multifamily Utility Company. Prior to joining this company, Kate was employed by REIT Avalon Bay Communities for more than 20 years, where she was responsible for utility recovery. She now helps her clients at Multifamily Utility Company to achieve holistic solutions by solving complex problems, focusing on water, gas, or electric sub-meter solutions, resident billing programs, or a complex portfolio analysis to find hidden NOI and energy management solutions. We also have Ryan Hemphill, who's the Director of Sales at Multifamily Utility Company, and he'll be running our slides for us today. Thank you for doing that. So welcome, Kate and Ryan, and take it away.
All right, good morning, everyone. We thank you all for joining us again this morning, and thank you, ladies, for the introduction. So what we're going to talk about today, here are some of the topics that we're going to cover. Utility recovery first, what it is and why it's valuable for your multifamily community. Well, we're going to discuss the many different ways in which these issues are handled currently, whether that be the owners or management company are paying all the bills, whether there is a RUB system in place, sub-metering. We're going to discuss utility regulations, lease languages, and best practices. And what we hope to achieve by the end of this is that you all firstly are able to identify which one of these categories that you all fall under. And are you using the correct program right now? If you are not, what makes sense for you? And try to help guide you all through just understanding this process. Is a lot of information. We do apologize in advance, as this is not a topic that we love or that's a whole bunch of fun to discuss. But we do hope that we give you all a great understanding of how this works, how to make it beneficial for your communities, and ultimately how to boost your bottom line.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our expert, Kate, to speak on utility recovery. Kate, over to you.
Thank you so much. First, I just wanted to say that this is your class, so please ask questions. If you have something specific about your property you'd like to know, we'll do our best to answer it, or we can answer it one-on-one afterwards, and I'll make sure that you have my contact information for that. So I look forward to hearing from you in the question box or later. The first thing I want to talk about is just the basics of what utility recovery is. Utility recovery is a method of recouping a property's energy expenses, like water, electric, and gas. You can recoup up to about 95% of these expenses. Most of you will fall under one of these categories: all bills paid, flat rates, sub-metered billing, or ratio billing. You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Right now, about 41% of the multifamily market is falling under some kind of recovery program, although that is rapidly growing right now due to at-home residents.
Hey, Kate, quick question for you. Why, in your opinion, why has it only been 41% across the board before what's going on right now. What do you think contribute to that?
I think that there's a lot of myths about a recovery program, that it may affect, and their occupancy rates, which we have not found to be true at all. I think that there is a lot of misunderstanding about how fairly it can be billed back. Those are two of the primary reasons, I would say.
I would agree with that completely. So let's talk about the first one of these scenarios, which is all bills currently being paid by the ownership group or management company. Now, if we were in a room, I would ask everybody to raise their hands which category you fall under. So I assume that there's one or two people that may be virtually raising their hands at this point. So Kate, let's kind of explain a little bit of what the all bills paid model looks like.
Sure, absolutely. I think the best way to explain all bills paid is the resident doesn't pay for their utilities. The resident benefits are awesome because they have no utility expense. They don't have to worry about a bill coming for utilities and budget for it. But consequently, they also don't have any incentive to conserve. We've all driven by a building that has the windows open in the middle of winter, for example. So I think that's that's a big benefit to residents. Where it can hurt the owner is pretty evident, but just to kind of say a little bit about it, with a lot of people at home, for example, right now, I've been hearing from owners who are seeing their first April and even May bills come in, and they are staggeringly higher than what they were used to because people are using electronic equipment at home and they're using more water, obviously more electricity. So, there's just no way to control your budget or to allow extra money for capital improvements, for example.
Agreed. And then to add a little bit to that as well, both Kate and I have worked on both sides of the industry, both the property management and the supplier side. And back when I was way back in the Stone Age, I guess we're going to call it, when I was working on site as well, we at a couple of communities we used all bills paid as an actual amenity, so to speak, to sell to
Right.
potential prospects. And I think to Kate's point, we're really seeing a backlash of that right now, where it was once an amenity and now becoming more essential to have something in place.
And I'll just
All right,
add one
let's
more
talk about.
I just want to add one more anecdote about the all bills paid, because I come from the dinosaur ages in property management, and I was tasked at Avalon Bay with rolling out utility billing wherever it was legal to do so. And the biggest concern obviously was how would it affect our occupancy. And what we found is that rent was rent. And if we started to roll out utilities and we did it with really good disclosure, we didn't see a drop in occupancy. So I just wanted to put that in.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about scenario number two. So scenario number two is I am an owner. I do understand the importance of billing back for the resident usage at my community.
Right.
But I am unaware of the different methods, but I know to bill something. So let's talk a little bit about flat rate billing and how this is handled, and let's talk about some pros and cons there as well, Kate.
Sure. Well, the pros is that the owner sets the rate based on, let's say, a unit size or the number of bathrooms or some kind of method that's easy to calculate using maybe the annual expense and dividing it by the number of units to figure out approximately what, a per unit charge should be. And it's easy for the residents because they know what they're going to be charged each month, and they don't see a fluctuation bill that might go up or down depending upon the season. But they also, again, the residents have no incentive to conserve. I've heard from residents who say, well, I'm going to have to pay, $40, so why should I make any effort to conserve my heat, or water? I think the biggest point to underscore is that there's a regulatory risk for the owner. Regulations are pretty intense, and you have to be sure that you're not profiting from your utility billing program, even if it's a flat rate billing program. So you have to be sure that your calculation is carefully made and that you can defend it if it ever goes, to court.
Absolutely. And to add something to that as well, one thing that is a conversation that is had quite often with different owners who are flat rating across the country is, well, I am flat rating, but I'm recovering 100% of my utility cost. And so, Kate, I will pose this question to you.
Oh,
We've
yes.
discussed this before. Is it possible to flat rate bill and to optimize your recovery up to 100%?
No, and the reason is, and now is where we're seeing the results of that thinking. If you have a situation happen where there is a large leak at your property, or if there is a crisis like we're seeing right now, where the standard operating of a property is flipped, where people are working at home, you're going to see those increases go through the roof. And if you are flat rating, you're doing that based on previous expenses and your best guess. So you're never going to be able to do that by flat rating, and you can't pre-calculate or predict risks. In fact, you can't bill that way. You have to bill, if you're doing flat rating, based on some kind of methodology that you can defend. So no, it's not possible to do that.
I agree. And if any of you listening can prove otherwise, we will pay a lot of money for winning lottery numbers as well, because that would definitely be predicting the future. So we jokingly say there are only two scenarios that come out of flat rate billing. You're either overcharging, which is illegal, or you are undercharging, which means you are leaving potential income on the table. So let's talk about the next scenario. So I know, I believe in utility billing. I believe in billing back to our residents, and I believe in conservation. What is my third option?
So a sub-metering, where it's possible, is an excellent option. What's nice.
Now you say where it's possible. Let's talk about that a little bit. Why would it not be possible?
Sure. My favorite catchphrase is spaghetti plumbing. So if you have an older building, and by older I would say 1980s and back, if you have an older building, you're probably going to have shared risers and shared bathroom risers where there's no one single point or even two single points that you can meter. You may have to meter several points in the property.
Okay.
And that can be incredibly expensive.
Okay. So those are the cons. Why do we like sub-metering? Let's talk about that. Let's start.
Absolutely. So for new construction, for example, it's a wonderful solution. What's great is it's based on a resident's actual in-unit usage, which is fair. They're absolutely able to see that they are using so much water on each bill, and they can adjust their behavior accordingly, right? And so there is an incentive to conserve, which I think is important for the resident, the owner, and the planet. So I think that's really good, because they know if they go easy on their utilities that they're going to have a better bill and have more control over their budget. There is a significant investment up front, depending upon the plumbing configurations, like we said. However, if it's a single point that we have to meter, it's very reasonable. But the owner does pay for the investment up front. And I do want to say that retrofits, so putting a meter in an existing building later rather than at new construction. So if you purchase a building and you want to sub-meter it, it's going to be significantly more expensive, because you're going to have to do some plumbing reconfiguration. So there's additional plumbing expenses to consider.
Absolutely. And now, as far as you mentioned conservation, quite a bit already throughout the presentation. What, on average, what how much water, let's use water as an example, what would be a typical average reduction in consumption if we are looking to sub-meter a community?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I would say 25% or greater, depending upon your unit mix and your profile of your customers that are living there. So it's significant.
Wow. That is significant. And then one of the pieces that to add on here as well is when you are looking to sell a community as well.
Yes.
This is something that is looked at by the purchaser as a value add to the community. It does add some value as the residents are able to be directly responsible for their consumption. So it's less of an expense pass through to the owner as well.
No,
so
I think
would
that's
you
a
say,
really,
Kate,
I was going to say, I
go
think
ahead.
that's a really
Yeah.
good point. I just spoke to an owner yesterday who we're going to be doing billing for. And one of the reasons that made the deal, he's purchasing a property, make sense on paper was the fact that he knew that he could recoup his water and his gas bill. So that's a really good point.
Absolutely. So of all of the different billing options, would you say that this one is the most aggressive and will have the greatest financial impact, positive financial impact on recovery at the community?
Not necessarily. It's an excellent choice,
Okay.
but there is
Okay.
another one that you can
Okay.
think about.
Okay.
So
So
we want to talk
let's
about
talk about
ratio.
that one.
Mhm. Yeah. So sub-metering is an excellent solution, and I will not say that that isn't an excellent solution. It really is, and the payback is pretty quick. However, what's nice about ratio utility billing, or RUBS, is that the owner has zero equipment investment, and it's still extremely fair if a program is applied properly. So let me explain a little bit about what ratio utility billing is. So again, there's zero investment for the owners. RUBS, or ratio utility billing, is based on an algorithm or an equation. So owners can implement it themselves if their property management software has a program, but it might be limited, so you have to be careful. Or a billing partner whose experience can assist in making sure that you're getting the maximum back while staying within regulations. And this is the interesting point. Studies have shown that RUBS clients can serve greater than 18% without a sub-meter investment. So I think that's really interesting.
So now let me ask you this as well. With rubbing the different utilities at different types of communities, we do know we have some constraints with the year the community was built as to if we are able to rub those communities as well for those certain utilities. So can you speak a little bit to that, Kate, as well?
Sure, absolutely. So I want to give an example of a RUBS community that we recently put in place. This particular owner has lots of historical buildings. They like to take old buildings like factories and turn them into very interesting apartments. However, with the way that it is configured, it would be extremely expensive to sub-meter it. So what he's chosen to do, and this is a new program in the middle of this current crisis, is he's chosen to roll out the RUBS program on new move-ins, and at a later time begin charging renewals as well. And he is seeing as much as $40 a unit for water and $80 a unit for gas. So now, like coming in, so it can be really significant. And so to give you an example, $40 a unit is about the national average anyway. $80 is about what Pennsylvania gets for gas. So it's significant.
Certainly. So let's talk about this a little bit as well with RUBS. Let's create a scenario. So I am a new owner. I've purchased this new community. It's a 250 unit community. and I want to implement a RUBS billing program. But I am, and my water bills are averaging, let's say they're $8,000 a month. And right now I'm recovering zero. And I am very concerned about implementing this program as to what it may do to my potential vacancy. Do I have any options, and how would I control this cost a little bit to the residents? Is there anything in place that mandates that I have to bill everything back or just a portion?
Very good question. So with ratio utility billing, you can control how much you bill back your residents. That's kind of the great thing about it. You can take a look at what would happen to the average bill, for example, if you put in what's called a CAD, or a common area deduction.
Okay.
So literally you can look at each pre-bill and say, okay, this is a really high bill month. Do I really want to push back, a $50 bill to all of my residents? Maybe I want to throw in a CAD for 5% and just bring it down a bit. So that is absolutely something that the owner can control.
Okay. And is that something that can vary month to month? Can it fluctuate? Can that CAD be adjusted at different times of the year for different scenarios?
Yes,
okay.
It certainly can. I mean, it's good to not play with it too much. It can be confusing for both the owner and the resident. So I would say that, just a good rule of thumb that I think is maybe changing it quarterly if you need to, or looking at it quarterly. And you don't want to be too aggressive with your common area deduction, because the residents are using the water. So it's okay for you to recoup the money, and you still want to maintain control so it's not a huge bill, but they are using the water. So it's something to keep in mind.
Agreed. And in all of this regarding all utility billing methods, but RUBS in particular, communication between the management team and the residents about their shared goals and directives regarding conservation are very important.
Yes.
If you are letting your community know that we are making an effort to conserve as a community, and we are requesting that you all will do the same thing in this partnership with us and make it feel like a greater sense of community, there will typically be a greater success rate as a result of handling it that way.
Excellent point. And I think one of the things that I always recommend with clients is that when you're starting to notify your residents that there's a billing program starting, is to send out conservation tips right away and let them know of the easy ways that they can start reducing their use. And you will get some calls for all of a sudden for running toilets. So what I found is that when we start to roll out programs, the maintenance will peak a little bit at the beginning, because all of those dripping faucets and running toilets will get called in. So even before this program is fully rolled out and penetrated to all your residents, the owner is going to see a reduction in people's usage, because now they know they're going to have to pay for it.
Absolutely. All right. All right, so let's talk about the different, we've gone through the four primary billing methods here. So review the common ways owned utilities. The first being all bills paid. This is the most expensive for the owner. The owner's legal responsibility. Residents tend to overconsume, overuse. We have a million different stories about either people filling swimming pools from inside of the kitchen faucet to taking showers, leaving the shower running while they sleep because the water helps them go to sleep.
Right.
A million different methods for that. For sub-metering, of course, incredibly accurate. It's the resident's direct usage. The utilities are the resident's responsibility, and this is the greatest area where it encourages conservation as well. Lastly is RUBS. It's accurate when calculated correctly. We didn't get into all of the different methodology of RUBS completely, but you can take quite a few different factors to determine which RUBS formula works best for you. whether that be the
Absolutely.
number of occupants inside of a unit or the square footage of a unit, a combination of the two. And there is conservation is strongly encouraged here as well. So we're going to pause for a very quick second. Are there any questions about that? Just pop them in the question box. We've answered a couple as they've come along. But if you want to take a couple of quick seconds and just, if you got any questions, we'll pause for a few.
Yes, remember this class is yours. So if you have a really specific question, I'm happy to answer it.
Can you answer the questions that are in the Q&A box? Can you do that verbally?
Yes, let's do that. So the first question was, do people really get audited for utilities? My answer to that one was absolutely. It does not happen often, and typically there is a resident complaint or issue. So what we see in those cases is that, and I have not seen as many in the Northeast. I'm going to use the great state of Louisiana as an example of this. There were a couple of different management companies and utility billing companies at the time that were very, very aggressively overcharging for utilities. They were essentially acting as resellers. So what ended up happening is that once the Louisiana Public Service Commission was made fully aware of it, they launched a full investigation. And now every parish, every city where the Public Service Commission has jurisdiction, third-party utility billing has been disallowed. The only way to bill for utilities there now is that you have to get the equipment directly from the utility provider and direct meter the residents, and they pay their water, sewer, electric, and gas directly to said utility provider. So yes, it does happen, and if it is determined that there has been a loss of institutional control, then they will bite down very, very hard on the issue.
Yeah,
so,
and I'd like to.
Go ahead. Yeah, please do, Kate.
I just wanted to add that, the most important thing that everyone needs to remember is to not be greedy. You want to be sure that you're not billing back more than you've paid. I think that's the biggest rule of thumb. And then also being sure that you have very good utility lease language in place that the resident has signed before any kind of billing happens, and that your billing program follows what's in your lease.
Absolutely. And the second question is, does submetering increase the value of a property, and by how much? So my answer to that one is kind of open-ended a little bit. It can increase the value of the property, and the value is a bit subjective depending on the purchaser. Some owners see more value than others in submetering. So I know that's not a resounding yes, absolutely, and a dollar amount, but it is one of those things. It's kind of a bit of an eye of the beholder thing. It will make your community a little bit more appealing to an owner, as they know that not only is their utility billing program in place, but there are also meters there so the residents can be billed directly for their own usage. Kate, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I sure do. When we were doing acquisitions at Avalon Bay, one of the things we would look at is yield, and the yield that the property would give us as the owner. And so it was important that there was a program in place, or that we had the ability, based on the regulations, to put a program in place. And then we would add back in that revenue that we would get from utility billing as part of the yield. So while the equipment may or may not be, it's valued, but not, it depends on the beholder. I think that the actual increase in the yield, if you're looking to buy or sell a property by having a billing program potentially in place or in place, is great.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you for that, Kate. I don't see any other questions popping up in the box, so we'll go ahead and continue at this point. Thank you all for your questions and for the pause. All right, so now let's get into the regulatory body. So as Kate has mentioned a couple of different times already, this is one of these areas where we do want to make sure that you have an understanding of what you can and cannot do. So we're going to talk about the process here and how you vet out what makes the most sense, who has jurisdiction truly over your community, and what some of the do's and don'ts are. So Kate, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, great. So I think the most important thing that I want to say about regulations is you need to be aware of local, which would be like a city that the property is located in, state and national regulations. And you also need to know if your particular utility provider has any specific regulations. So the first thing to figure out is, okay, which are my utility bill companies, obviously? Do they have any specific regulations? And what are the regulations by state, city, regional, and national? So it is important to find that out first. And under Pennsylvania regulations, there is the PUC, which has jurisdiction over 11 electric distribution companies, which is just electric companies. And the PUC also has jurisdiction over 150 water companies and 35 gas companies. So again, just to kind of underscore this, it's important for you to find the regs and understand the regs as best you can before you start a program, or if you're currently starting a program, it's a great idea to review these maybe quarterly at least and make sure that you're still falling under those regulations. So step one is determine who has jurisdiction over your property. So let's talk about the ratio utility billing regulations in Pennsylvania. So these are the actual regulations for Pennsylvania. For electricity, electricity RUBS is not allowed unless a building was built prior to 1980. Any buildings built after 1980, the utility provider has to put in a submeter. So that's helpful when it comes to electricity. I do have lots of clients in Pennsylvania who have historic buildings, so ratio utility billing for electric is allowed in those types of scenarios. For gas, there's not much regulation on gas. Essentially, the law is silent, but it's a really good idea to call your gas provider and see if they have any specific regs for your property. And it's an easy phone call to make, and it's worth doing. And then lastly, for RUBS, water is allowed, but you have to be careful to follow all the regulations regarding fees and make sure that your lease is crystal clear on how you're going to bill it. You don't want to be overly aggressive with any kind of fees. So it's a good idea to make sure that you read the regulations and you determine exactly what those are going to be and make sure that everything is listed in your lease.
Absolutely.
Submetering. So this falls back to relating to the clause that we read before. For electricity, buildings prior to 1980 can be submetered with permission from the utility in the form of a waiver. Otherwise, the utility should be metering those utilities. Again, gas is silent. You should contact your utility to make sure they don't have any specific regulations. If you're going to submeter gas, as with electric, obviously you need to hire a professional to do the actual installation. That's really important. And then lastly, with water, it's absolutely allowed. There are some restrictions in terms of how you bill it. So that's important, you know, not overbilling, not making a profit on the water is very, very important. And again, being careful with your fees and making sure that you are disclosing everything in your lease on how you're going to bill. Are there any questions about the submetering that I can answer? I don't see any open questions, but feel free.
Okay. All right, so Kate, I know you mentioned the lease language being extremely important. Let's kind of talk about this and notice periods and all the above with the sample lease language page.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So this is a sample of a RUBS lease language addendum. What's important that I'd like you to see in this particular example for RUBS is that We've listed every type of scenario that we can think of. And even though we may go with one method when we start the billing program, it's important to have the flexibility to change the method and to make sure you haven't left something off in case that billing method needs to change. So you can see that this is a very explicit disclosure about how we might bill. And we're going to, circle, if you look towards the middle, we're going to circle exactly which commodities we're going to bill: water, sewer, gas, electric, and so on. So if you were going to be rolling out a program to existing residents, you need to look at your lease and see what kind of notice is required. I think 60 days is a good rule of thumb for even a minimum, to let them know that upon renewal, you're going to have a change and you're going to be starting to roll out a program. Obviously, with new move-ins, there isn't a notice required, but they do need to sign this lease language to be sure that they understand that they're going to be billed for a utility.
Absolutely. And one more point to add to the many different methods being listed on there. Many owners will choose to not disclose all of the different methods on there. That's really, we always recommend putting everything on there, because you may get halfway down the road with a program and realize that there is a better method that makes more sense for you to be using for your residents. So we did have a question pop up too, so I think I'm going to answer this slide. Can we have the lease language later in larger font? Yes, I believe the PA team is going to send out this to everyone, and you'll definitely get a copy of it. And I'm sure the font will be larger than on my very small computer screen. So
no, I understand, and I have huge glasses, so I completely relate. I did want to say that it's really important for this lease language that you always consult with your attorney to be sure that it addresses your billing program correctly. So, always run this past your attorney before you start a program.
Okay. All right, so that's a great segue into just general best practices as well. Firstly being, checking your regulations before you make any change whatsoever. Always, starting with local to state to national, understanding who has jurisdiction and understanding what you can and can't do. The second being protect yourself as an owner, manager, by having utilities paid by residents. Kate mentioned earlier with the owners that are either flat rating or including all utilities in their rent, there is a significant increase in their exposure right now due to everyone, being at home for, pretty much the majority of each day. And we know things are going to loosen up a little bit over time. But these last couple of months have been very, very critical. The next is choose an experienced submetering company. Expertise is required for correct installations. We have heard over the years, we've just heard from different people with different companies with different experiences. And utility billing, when managed properly, is incredibly efficient. And when it's communicated well, it really does ultimately end up working for all parties involved. When we speak with someone that does not believe in utility billing, we generally attribute it to one of two things. Either they had an unfortunate experience with a billing company, or the communication was not proper. The communication was not proper between all the parties, and it was either rolled out incorrectly or poorly. Go ahead, Kate, take it away.
Well, I wanted to say that one of the things that is so important, to get to your point, is that there's a couple of people that need to be involved in this whole process to get buy-in, and it's everyone on site and the resident. So it's incredibly important to educate and re-educate, because there's turnover in leasing, for example, your staffs on the program and how it works and why it's fair, and answer all of their questions about how the billing works, and make sure that they're very, very well trained. And even your maintenance supervisor, he's your emissary when he's out on site. And you want that person to be very, very educated and on board with why they benefit from having a billing program in place, because people are going to be more watchful of their usage for their utilities. So if you have the whole site very, very educated, your chances of having them on board is really key. And with the resident, if the leasing person or manager explains the program really, really well up front and says, do you have any questions about this that I can answer before, we go forward, then they have an opportunity to ask the questions and to feel good about it. It's important that their responses are, pro-program and pro-conservation, so that the resident knows, okay, I know what my bill's going to be on average, and I know who it's going to come from, and I know that it's in my lease, and I know how I'm going to be billed, and I know what I can do to conserve. So if you get all of those parties educated and agreeing on what's going to happen, you won't have the problem with getting penetration, getting more residents billing, and you won't have any surprises.
Absolutely, absolutely. A few more bullets on here just to make sure that we touch on, just simply ensuring that you're compliant with correct lease language. And lastly, and Kate touched on this a couple of different times, disclose a complete explanation of any billing methods you used and any fees charged, and have the resident sign off acknowledging that they have been informed of this. It's typically done through the actual utility addendum like we discussed earlier, but it's repeated throughout this presentation. Communicate, 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 followed up with educate, 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 educate. So those are the best ways and best practices to make sure that the program is successful, that you all are able to maximize your recovery and billing a responsible rate through to the resident, and ultimately getting to a point of conservation where the residents are well aware, they feel as though they are in control of that, somewhat in control of that cost. And you all as operators are very pleased with the actual recovery.
Well, I do want to say that we have time for some more questions. If anybody has any, I'm happy to answer them. Here is my contact information. I'm 100% available to you after the class to answer any specific questions you have about a program that you have that's existing, or one that you're thinking about rolling out. So I definitely want you to, reach out to me and let me know what you're thinking about. Are there any more questions that we can answer? Brian, have we answered all the open questions that you see?
I think we have. Yeah.
It looks like we have, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kate and Ryan, for spending the morning with us. This has been invaluable information, I think, for all of our attendees. If you can go to that last slide on the next one. There we go. So this is our coronavirus resource page on the PAA website. I really encourage people to go there. If you have questions about, the virus, there's more information about moving back into the work world again. And there's also our emergency assistance fund. There's information about that. And you can click on these for updated information on best practices in our industry during this time. So thank you both for being with us this morning, and we wish everybody good luck and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.